everyone, and welcome back. We're diving into the world of Bitcoin today.
Yeah.
But not just any Bitcoin day.
Right.
We're talking about some serious moves happening that have everyone kind of speculating, what's next.
Yeah, and we're seeing this story kind of unfold across, news articles, social media, even the blockchain itself. There's a lot of chatter and even more data to look at.
So our mission today is to cut through the noise, figure out what's really going on. We've got some major Bitcoin withdrawals, whispers of whales, making waves.
Yeah.
And even institutions are getting in on the action.
Right.
So what does it all mean?
Well,
that's what we're here to find out.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is this idea of scarcity keeps coming up. Are we seeing Bitcoin enter a new phase?
Okay.
Where that limited supply is really going to drive some serious growth?
So first things first, let's talk about this massive Bitcoin withdrawal. 55,000 Bitcoin worth over $5 billion moved off exchanges in just 72 hours.
Wow.
That's not just, someone grabbing a quick coffee. That's a whole yacht full of espresso.
Yeah, that is definitely not typical trading behavior. And moving Bitcoin off exchanges is a signal in itself.
Okay.
So think of it this way. When Bitcoin is held on an exchange, it's essentially in play. It's ready to be bought and sold.
Right.
But when it's moved off, it suggests a longer-term holding strategy. They're taking those coins out of the active trading pool.
So that means there are fewer Bitcoins available to trade then, right?
Right.
And if so, wouldn't that push the price up?
Exactly. It's classic supply and demand.
Okay.
If the supply shrinks, but the demand stays the same or even increases, we could see a huge price jump. Imagine if suddenly half the oranges in the world got locked away.
Oh, wow.
What do you think would happen to the price of the oranges that were left?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this all connects, but who's behind this massive withdrawal? The rumor mill is pointing to those mysterious Bitcoin whales, right?
Right. Whales are essentially the big players in the Bitcoin world. Yeah.
They're individuals, institutions, even hedge funds with enough Bitcoin to really make waves in the market. And it seems like they're not selling, they're accumulating.
Wow.
They're adding to their holdings.
So what's driving this whale activity? I mean, Bitcoin's always been volatile, but this feels different.
Well, there are a couple potential explanations, and both are pretty interesting.
Okay.
First, you got to remember that 34% price jump Bitcoin had last month.
Yeah.
From around $72,000 to over $96,500.
That was wild.
Some people are speculating that these savvy whales saw this as a chance to buy the dip, anticipating further growth.
I mean, that price jump was pretty crazy, but wasn't it mostly driven by short-term speculation?
Yeah.
Could that really be a solid foundation for the long-term growth these whales seem to be betting on?
It's a good question. It's always possible that some of this activity is, driven by that short-term speculation.
Right.
But the sheer scale of these withdrawals that we're seeing, I think, suggests something much more strategic.
These whales aren't just dipping their toes in the water.
Right.
They're diving in head first.
Okay, so maybe it's not just about that recent price jump. Then what's the other explanation for all this whale activity?
Well, there's another piece to this puzzle that might be contributing to, the current Bitcoin landscape, and that's the Mt. Gox repayments.
Oh, yeah.
So remember, there was another large movement of Bitcoin recently, 81,000 Bitcoin to be exact.
Wow.
And this is most likely related to those long-awaited Mt. Gox repayments, a saga with a long and complicated history.
Yeah, so we've got these whales potentially buying the dip, and this Mt. Gox situation that could potentially flood the market with Bitcoin.
Right.
Sounds like things could get pretty interesting.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity, right?
Yeah.
The Mt. Gox repayments could have a counteracting effect on this whole supply shock that we're seeing. So on the one hand, you have Bitcoin being locked away, in cold storage, which reduces the active supply. But on the other hand, you have this large chunk of Bitcoin potentially being reintroduced into the market. So it'll be really interesting to see how these two forces interact and ultimately what it means for the price, both in the short and long term.
Yeah, this is where I start to feel like I need a flowchart to keep up.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in the weeds, there's another player we need to talk about, and that's institutions. Companies like MicroStrategy and Metaplanet, they're buying up Bitcoin like it's going out of style.
Yeah, that's right.
Why is that?
And these companies aren't just treating Bitcoin as a speculative asset. They're viewing it as a strategic reserve, a digital form of gold, if you will.
Okay.
And this shift in perception from these institutional players is a major driver of Bitcoin's growing mainstream acceptance.
So it's not just those mysterious whales anymore. It's big companies betting on Bitcoin's future. But what does this all mean for the average person? Someone like me who's trying to understand what's going on with Bitcoin?
That's a great question, and it's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, so lay it on me. What does all this whale activity in institutional investment mean for, the average person watching Bitcoin?
Well, think of it this way. When you see big players, whether they're whales or these established companies making bold moves like we've been talking about, it kind of sends a ripple effect through the whole market.
So it's like a confidence booster for the rest of us.
Right.
If they're willing to put billions of dollars into Bitcoin, maybe there's something to it.
Exactly. It signals that they see something substantial in Bitcoin's future, something beyond just short-term gains, you know? And when you combine that growing confidence with the fact that more Bitcoin is being locked away in cold storage, remember those withdrawals.
Yeah.
It creates a situation where demand could really outstrip supply.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned this whole supply shock idea earlier.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for me again? I'm trying to picture what that actually looks like in the real world.
Sure, imagine a scenario where everyone suddenly decides that they absolutely have to have a specific rare comic book.
Okay.
The demand for that comic book skyrockets, but the number of comic books in existence stays the same. What happens?
The price goes way up.
Exactly.
Okay.
So with all this Bitcoin being held long term, it's kind of like those rare comic books. There just isn't enough to go around for everyone who wants it.
Right. So that limited supply coupled with increasing demand, that could lead to a pretty significant price increase for Bitcoin
Yeah, precisely.
in the near future.
It's classic economics at play.
So we've got these whales making big moves. We've got institutions diving in head first, and we've got this potential supply shock on the horizon. Is it safe to say that things are looking pretty bullish for Bitcoin right now?
I'd say there's a lot of evidence pointing in that direction. The crypto landscape is constantly evolving, but these recent developments, I think, really do indicate that Bitcoin is solidifying its place as a significant asset.
Okay. I'm definitely getting the sense that this is a pretty pivotal moment for Bitcoin. But before we wrap things up, I think it's important to acknowledge that, no one can predict the future with absolute certainty, right?
Absolutely. While there are a lot of positive signs right now, you have to remember that the crypto world is still relatively young and it is inherently volatile.
Right.
There are always risks involved.
So what's the key takeaway for our listeners who are trying to make sense of all this?
The important thing is to understand those underlying dynamics. By following these trends and analyzing the data and considering, different perspectives, you can start to make more informed decisions about your own involvement with Bitcoin.
Knowledge is power, especially in a fast-paced world like crypto. We've covered a lot of ground today, from those massive Bitcoin withdrawals and whale activity to the growing role of institutions and this whole concept of a supply shock. But before we let you go, we want to leave you with something to think about.
Right.
A question to kind of spark your curiosity and, further your own exploration of this topic.
Here's a thought to consider. If these trends continue, if more and more Bitcoin gets locked away and institutions continue to invest, what will it mean for the future of Bitcoin? Will it become a mainstream asset like gold, a digital safe haven in times of economic uncertainty?
Or is this just a temporary blip, a bubble that's waiting to burst?
It's impossible to say for sure, but one thing is certain. The story of Bitcoin is far from over. It's a story that's being written every single day, by the actions of its users, investors, and believers.
And we encourage you to be an active participant in that story. Keep learning, exploring, and questioning. The world of Bitcoin is full of surprises, and the journey is just beginning.
And to help you continue that exploration, we've included links to all the sources that we talked about today down in the show notes, so we highly recommend checking those out.
So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and as always, happy diving. It really does feel like we're at a crossroads with Bitcoin.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have all these massive forces pushing it towards mainstream acceptance.
Right.
But then on the other hand, there's still so much uncertainty, so much volatility.
That's the exciting part, though, isn't it? It's like watching this high-stakes poker game unfold in real time.
Oh, yeah.
We can analyze the players, we can study the moves and try to predict the outcome, but ultimately the future of Bitcoin is still being written.
And it's a story with a lot of twists and turns. Who would have predicted that we'd be talking about Bitcoin as potential digital gold just a few years ago?
Absolutely. The narrative is constantly evolving, and that's what makes it so fascinating to follow. It's not just about the technology. It's about the people, the ideas, and the forces that are shaping the future of finance.
So if we zoom out a bit and look at the big picture, what are the key factors that will determine whether Bitcoin, succeeds or fails in the long run?
I think there are a few key things to watch. Regulation is going to play a huge role. Governments around the world are still grappling with how to regulate cryptocurrencies, and their decisions will have a major impact on Bitcoin's adoption and use.
So it's not just about the technology itself.
Right.
It's about how governments and regulators choose to interact with it.
Exactly. If governments create a hostile regulatory environment, it could stifle innovation, it could discourage investment.
Yeah.
But if they embrace a more open and collaborative approach, it could pave the way for wider adoption and integration into, the existing financial system.
Okay, that makes sense. What else should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, scalability is another big challenge. Bitcoin's current network can only process a limited number of transactions per second, which, that could become a bottleneck as adoption grows.
Yep.
There are a number of solutions being developed to address this, but it's definitely something to watch closely.
So it's like trying to fit a growing city onto a tiny island.
Exactly.
You need to find ways to expand that infrastructure to accommodate the increasing demand.
That's a great analogy. And then, of course, there's the competition. Bitcoin isn't the only cryptocurrency out there.
Right.
It's facing increasing competition from newer, faster, and more feature-rich alternatives.
It's a crowded space, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So how do you think Bitcoin stacks up against its rivals? Does it still have what it takes to, remain the dominant cryptocurrency?
Well, Bitcoin has a few key advantages that I think have helped it maintain its position, as the leading cryptocurrency. It has the largest network effect, the most established brand recognition, and a proven track record of security and resilience.
So it's kind of like the first mover in a new market.
Mm-hmm.
It has that head start and a loyal following.
Exactly, but that doesn't mean it can just rest on its laurels. The cryptocurrency space is incredibly dynamic, and Bitcoin needs to continue to innovate and evolve to stay ahead of the curve.
So what can we expect to see from Bitcoin in the coming years? Any predictions?
It's hard to say for sure, but I think we'll see continued efforts to improve scalability, to enhance privacy, and to expand its utility beyond just a store of value. We might even see the development of new applications and use cases that we haven't even imagined yet.
It sounds like the future of Bitcoin is still very much unwritten, and that's what makes it so exciting to follow.
Absolutely. It's a journey full of possibilities, and I, for one, can't wait to see what the next chapter holds.
Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today, from whale activity and institutional investment to the challenges and opportunities that are facing Bitcoin's future.
It's been a fascinating conversation, and I hope our listeners have gained some valuable insights into this, really dynamic and evolving space.
And if you're eager to learn more, we encourage you to check out the links to all the sources that we mentioned in the show notes. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more deep dives into the world of crypto and beyond.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and stay curious.
And as always, happy diving.